Good morning. I'm Robert Holler. I'm the Executive Director of your Canadian Water and Wastewater Association. Happy Thursday, March the 10th. Excited to put on this webinar hosted by your CWWA. We are the national voice for the water and wastewater sector in Canada. And our primary role is to represent our sector to the federal government so that we are your voice on all policy development in Ottawa. But we also work to facilitate networking, like our national webinar conference that just ended in January. You can still see some of that online. Or our window on Ottawa this summer. In June, we'll be doing a series of events where you'll hear firsthand federal policymakers. But the biggie is Halifax. We are going to be live together in Halifax in November 6th to 9th, and I hope you can join us. But one of the other things we do is information sharing. Because of the vast knowledge of our membership and the caliber of the volunteers that we get on our board of directors and on our committees is so powerful that we want to share it. All these members of our committees are Canada's water leaders. Yeah. They're passionate, they're enthusiastic. I love working with them every day. And most importantly, they want to share what they know. One of our working committees is the Utility Leadership Committee. And a year ago, we launched a guidance document called Towards a Sustainable Utility. It's available on our website. And it was a guide to help moving your utility to that point of being more sustainable. One of the keys to sustainability is your workforce, the people who work for you. And so the first priority of the committee to expand on our thoughts was to look at our workforce development. And they put out a survey. Greg will tell you more about it, but we have a working group and a lot of wonderful contributors. There are many contributors to what we're about to present today and the guidance document that was prepared. Some of the key contributors are here online with us today to walk us through and introduce you to the guidance document. Personally, I'll thank everybody again at the end, but I really want to thank all the contributors of the committee, my co-editor, Madeline Butchler, who was a great assistance in getting this together, and then the communications manager for CWWA, Cara Parisienne, who put the whole package together and makes it look beautiful. And she's running our webinar today. So thank you, Cara. But every team needs a leader. And our leader is Greg Archibald. Greg took on leadership of this working group. Greg is the Chief Executive Officer of the Pembina Valley Water Cooperative in southern Manitoba. It's owned by and provides potable water to 14 municipalities. Greg's kind of a newcomer to the water. 35 years, senior manufacturing, forestry, agriculture, pulp and paper. And then he came over and brought all that skill and leadership into the water sector. Since 2016, Greg's been our Manitoba rep on our board of directors, and he just spent 4 years as our association secretary treasurer. And I really enjoyed working with Greg. So with that, I'm going to introduce our leader, Greg Archibald.
Thank you very much, Robert. Welcome, everybody. We're really pleased you've had an opportunity to join us this morning for the release of our CWWA Workforce Development Guidance Document. I think with pending retirements in a number of utilities, with changing demographics, it's really critical for focusing on developing our effective workforce. So whether you're a large utility or whether you're a small utility or something in between, we have something for all of you with our guidance document to help support you in your workforce development. Now, in just a minute, I'm going to talk a little bit in overview about our process, and then I'll be joined by 3 different working group members, and they're going to highlight some of the things that we've been able to identify in this document, things like best practices, themes, checklists, and the like. And then at the end, We're going to encourage you through the session to post questions or comments in the chat, but we're going to wait till the end and then we'll go and take a look at that and have a little bit of a discussion and see with the whole group if we can answer your questions and talk a little bit about our process. So just quickly, the guidance document process began when we formed a leadership working group way back, so a year and a half ago or so. And we first started it by saying, well, let's do a survey with the membership and see what's important. And out of that survey, we identified that there was some best practices or themes that are really important in developing an effective workforce. Things like a gap analysis, things like succession planning and employee development, operator training plans and training for new technology, and recruiting. So just continuing on, Kara, next slide. So then as we had this discussion, we came up with some checklists that we're going to discuss and will be made available to everyone in terms of developing your workforce. Whether you're trying to figure out how to do the things that would be required for operator training, for management supervision, for engineering, or for maintenance. And so this will all be made available. And we have in our total document, there's checklists and resources. So just the next slide. So you can see here the membership of the folks that were involved, a combination of very skilled utility leaders and folks and technical experts across the country. Next slide. And so, as I said, when we started off, one of the first things was, well, what would be important around workforce development? So we went to the membership, and this is just the first slide of the some of the respondents that we had. So then next slide. We asked what the top challenges were at the end of our survey. And it's interesting, this was a smattering of the top challenges, and you'll notice what's in blue. And it really highlights the importance of the people side and the development side. And some folks have said if you get the people part of the business right, the rest comes along. And so this gave us some direction as we began to pull together this overall guidance document. Next slide. So today is the day. The CWWA guidance document will be released today. There will be a document, a link on the website that will allow you to do it. And there'll probably be some communication with links after today, and it will be downloadable. And we'll even have downloadable checklists. So without further ado, let's get going. And I would like to first introduce our first speaker today. And our first speaker is Nancy Kaduzek. Nancy is the Director of Water Services for the region of Waterloo, where she's directed long-term master plans, process optimization, asset management, innovation projects. She has senior management experience with both municipal and private sector utilities and is really known for her approach of encouraging leadership development. Nancy has served as the president of CWWA and is our representative currently on the Canadian National Committee for the International Water Association. Nancy, please go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. And welcome everyone today. I'm Nancy Kadusik. I'm the Director of Water Services in the region of Waterloo. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather today is the land traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people. I also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share the land today. Thank you, and next slide, Kara. So I wanted to take a few minutes and just reflect on our workforce and the changes that have occurred over the last 2 years. If we think about those changes, we think about the hybrid ways of working that we have. We think about remote meetings that we're doing now, the automated business processes that we've introduced over the last several years, and how we have prioritized prioritized work very differently than how we have in the past. And when we look at that and we think about workforce planning, we recognize that what our staff need is very different than what we have done before. And our processes need to reflect this change. Karen, next slide, please. So the question is your current system still working for you? And I think if you think about succession planning, workforce development, having those performance discussions that are meaningful, change management, helping your staff with all the changes in the workplace. I think today we need to cover some different ways of approaching things, and I hope that this new guidance manual will help you do that. And I'd like to speak a little bit about the gap analysis that we've introduced in the document and a case study from the region of Waterloo. Next slide, please. So starting with the gap analysis, let's think about three kind of key principles: a workforce assessment, employee readiness, and collaboration. So when you look at workforce assessment, you really need to think about each position. Who are the direct reports? Who does the position report to? Is there an opportunity because of change, either change through the organization, through automation, through technology, that you want to change that position? So looking at those opportunities, and is it critical? Is it critical because of the skills they need? Is it critical because it's difficult to recruit for that position? You need to consider those, as well as the culture and value of your organization. And how will that person really fit into that team and make it a success? And then you need to think about employee readiness. So if you're looking at your staff, you need to have those performance management discussions and that process in place, and be able to assess your staff. Are they ready? Do they have that capacity? Do they have those leadership skills? Sometimes you're surprised by how people are leading others. Do they have the management capacity? How is technology impacting the way they work and how they will work in the future? And what training is available for them? And finally, collaboration. Of course, you need to bring your human resources partners together and have them involved, as well as your senior management team. Because if you're going to build this plan, you need that support. You may be looking at different training than what is normal for under human resources, or you may be looking at doing some innovations with temporary positions or assignments where you need senior management support. Next slide, please. So when you build a plan, you really need to consider the position. And you know, as much as the great work you can do internally, you have to really think about external as well. Is it going to be succession planning? Is it going to be a recruitment and an external process? But either way, it's very important that once the incumbent is on board, that you have that training and development plan in place. You really want to work on a transition plan where you're creating maybe a buddy system. You're providing that training, you're providing those check-ins, because your goal here is really to ensure success. And that's really what's common for both of these options, but also how you move it forward. Next slide, please, Kara. So some benefits of the gap analysis is as you get better at it, it's something you can do every year. You can look at your workforce and it provides you that roadmap to think, what's happening this year? Is someone retiring? Is someone itching to move up in the organization? Does someone need more training? And so it gives you that framework to look at your staff, to work with your staff, and to build that plan. It's also an opportunity to prioritize what's important. What's happening in your organization? Are there opportunities for training, to capture some training that is important for your team, for your organization right now? And finally, it's allowing you to set realistic goals. So if you need some temporary positions, it gives you time to think about when you would apply them. If there's temporary assignments, how would you work it through to have those discussions and to move things forward so you can have a successful plan. Next slide, please. So with that, I'd like to move into a bit of a case study from the region of Waterloo, one where we dealt with engineering progression. Next slide, please. So the region of Waterloo, for those of you who don't know, is located in southwestern Ontario. We have a population of approximately 600,000, and we're an interesting two-tier municipality. And what does that mean? We provide the water supply and the wastewater treatment, and the local municipalities do the distribution and collection. Next slide, please. So when we looked at engineering progression, we asked a few questions. What were our goals? Well, historically, we didn't have very many junior engineers. We always seemed to be hiring senior level engineers, and that's probably not good for an organization. And we had a large number of job descriptions for engineers. And when we had to move an engineer from a intermediate level to a senior level, we had to go through a recruitment posting. And it didn't make a lot of sense to us. There wasn't a lot of value in doing that process. So we had to think about who needed to be involved. So we involved HR, but not just one group of them. We involved the recruitment section of HR as well as the compensation group. We looked to our senior management as our cheerleaders or our supporters of this. And then we looked at what tools we needed. And we also looked at the support and tools. So job descriptions, job evaluations, recruitments, and a communication plan. Next slide, please. So then we started to build this plan. We had our working group, which was involved the engineers and human resources from throughout the region. And we reviewed all the engineering job descriptions within the region. We then started to group them and align them. And we did reference the professional engineers of Ontario to help us understand how we could do that better. We created a streamlined group of job descriptions, and we recognized that the majority of functions were very similar, but there were some specialty areas within each of the job descriptions. Next slide, please. So once we had our job descriptions and we had identified areas that were common, and we had noted things like, design and consulting, project management, we then looked at job levels, and we thought about that, started to build that progression piece. So what would be the criteria for someone who was working on a project to work at a more junior level, an intermediate or senior? And how would we set that up? And how would we define those qualities and criteria? And by doing that, by setting up our job descriptions, by developing our profiles, and working together on common expectations and understanding, we were able to create that engineering progression. Next slide, please. So progression steps were really based on that performance management plan and discussion that you have with your staff, those career conversations. So you really need to look at those performance discussions. And in this case, now you have your progression documentation, which you can share with staff, and it helps them understand where they perhaps need to improve, build capacity, increase their learning. And it's a very even way of reviewing skill sets, competencies, and then moving progressing staff or advancing them forward. And of course, we created administrative processes to help in implementing the approach. Next slide, please. In terms of the time frame, it took us about 1 year between the time that we started to review the job descriptions and create a common approach. Even the titles of the job descriptions had some time for discussion. We developed the profiles, and again, we used resources, we reviewed options, and then eventually we created our progression criteria, and finally communicated to our engineering team, to our senior management, and implemented the program in the first year as a pilot. Next slide, please. So what was the plan? Well, we developed 3 tiers of progression. And from there, we developed the rating to allow progression to be identified, rated, and to identify capacity to support any development that was needed, and identified competencies as well for each level of progression. Next slide, please. So very simply, there were 3 levels: engineering intern, an engineer, and a senior engineer. And if you can imagine, just coming up with these 3 titles, it took quite a while for all the players, all the team involved in this program. Next slide, please. So for the engineering intern, we really look to those PEO qualifications. And we look at quality of experience. We looked at practical experience, managing, communication skills, and social implications. But as we move forward, next slide, please, into the engineering position, you see now that we have defined our competencies and criteria. And if I just pick off a few of them, like engineering design, they develop preliminary designs. Under budgeting, they would be developing budget. Under project controls, they would be monitoring. And then when we go to the senior engineer, next slide, please. The language changes. And if we go back to those same criteria, you'll see before the timing was someone in the 4 to 10 year of experience, where this senior engineer is 11 years plus. The language changes, and as we talk about engineering design, they talk about preparing and reviewing. Under budgeting, it's estimating and managing. And under project controls, it's establishing. So the competencies and the language at each of the different criteria and rating changes significantly. So we did roll it out for 1 year. It was successful throughout the region, and we have continued with that approach. And we share some of this information in the guidance manual that was released, I think, today. Anyway, thank you very much. And with that, next slide, please. I thank you for your time this morning. And Greg, back to you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. I really appreciate it. And I think you can see with what Nancy shared there. First, she spoke about the gap analysis and how important it is to look at the different elements of your workforce and do that gap and find analysis and find out where your priority focus areas are. And then we really appreciate Nancy and the work of her municipality around engineering development. She's allowed us to borrow and include in the CWWA guidance document some really good work that's been done to identify the distinct skill sets between an intern engineer, an intermediate engineer, and a senior engineer. So just some wonderful things that you can use as you look for and use the development of your engineers in the future. So now I'm going to move on to our next area, and I'll be introducing Valerie Jenkinson. And Valerie is going to present on the succession planning and employee development, and she's going to talk a bit about our management checklist. So just before Valerie talks, she's a specialist in integrated water resource and effective utility management, and she's worked and presented on these projects all around the world. She's a recognized leader in her field, and she's been twice nominated as a Canadian Woman Entrepreneur of the Year. Her company, World Water and Wastewater Solutions, has been active in water and wastewater industry in the last 12 years, and she really specializes in capacity building. Now, for this 12-year period, she's focused a lot of her work in the Caribbean, and we're quite proud of, she founded in 2017 Operators Without Borders to get the Canadian operators to help with the disasters of hurricanes in the Caribbean region. The organization is now a registered Canadian charity with over 60 utility operators who volunteered to assist utilities with their disasters and to mentor and train their organizations. I would like to introduce Valerie, please.
Thank you very much, Greg. And I'm talking of disasters. I'm wearing my yellow and blue this morning in support of Ukraine. So I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. So I would like to thank Greg, because on this particular thing, on the workforce development and succession plan and employee development, he was my co-collaborator on the guidance document. So I want to acknowledge that as we go forward. So succession planning. What I have found coming from outside industry, from the water, when I first came into this industry, I found that succession planning wasn't on the radar at that point in time of a lot of the managers that I was dealing with. I remember talking to one senior manager who ran many utilities, and he said what kept him awake at night was the fact that 50% of his senior managers could retire within the next 3 years. And that was giving him a lot of headaches. So with succession planning, we've looked at our gap analysis that Beth was talking about and saying, what are the gaps that we have? Because with succession planning, we not only need to identify and develop the new leaders to replace our senior leaders, but we need to be looking to the future, because our industry is changing. Technology is changing. The way we are running our utilities is different from what it was. So we need to be looking at what are the skills in that gap analysis that we're going to need, not just to replace the people we have now and their skills, but looking to the future. So why do we do this? One thing is, with succession planning, we have to retain our organizational knowledge. There are so many individuals who've been around in the water industry for 30, 35 years, and they have so much in their heads. But what we look at is, how do we document that knowledge? And there needs to be, in our succession planning, a documentation of the knowledge that people have, so that if something happens to them or if they retire, that knowledge is not lost. We need to increase the availability of the experiences and capable employees. And one of the things that doing a lot of capacity building and working with employees, I hear the fact that I'm not really valued by the organization. They don't listen to me. And I remember doing training one utility and all of their people at one point in time, and the human resources manager said to me, we have a lot of very negative people in this organization. And what I'll do before they come into your session, I'll tell you which ones they are. And I said, please do not do that. Because what I found was not negative people, but people who were frustrated, who had a lot of ideas when they came in, but had learned just to shut up and put up because they weren't being listened to. So we have those people there. They have great skills. I always remember, near the start of my career when I was a young manager, going to listen to a fellow called Tom Peters, who many of you may recognize as one of the gurus of management. And he said what he found in a lot of organizations was that people would say, well, we've got some negative people. They don't work hard enough. They don't do this. And he said, ask them what they do in their spare time. You'll find that they're leaders of the Boy Scout group. They are a lead in an amateur acting association. They run this organization. They do this. And he said, and the only time that they're not working hard and not being positive are the 8 hours a day that they work for you. So what we need to do is make sure that in our succession planning and in the way that we look at people, we are looking at what everybody can bring to the table. So we want, as it said, to prepare employees to readily step into roles of increased responsibility as they become available, which can help with employee retention. So in succession planning, there's many ways that we can look at this. The retirement. In our succession planning, are we going to have more people now working from home? How do we manage that into our succession plan? Are we going to have more part-time employees? Are we going to have the full-time? Where do we need to go with our succession planning? Because the utility of today may not look like the utility of tomorrow. During COVID, or as we come out of COVID, in the UK, they're all privatized, the water utilities, and several of them have decided that they are not going to bring anybody back full time. They have retained a suite of offices that people can come in for meetings, but everybody's now, not in the operations obviously, but in the management area, are working from home. Is that something that we're looking at? I know a lot of people don't want to go back to work. Other people really do. So we're looking at hybrid models. How does that factor into our succession planning? And perhaps it opens the doors to people we might not have hired in the past because of our non-flexibility in the workplace. So something just to look at. This is a slide that I borrowed from Beth because I wanted just to show where the succession planning comes in. So it's in this internal, but it also goes to look at who we have internally. And do we need to look outside of the organizations for some of the skills that we don't have internally, or can we train? So this is just Beth's skills, or Beth's slide that she talked about that, just to show you where this comes into the practice. And obviously, the time to do the planning is not when somebody is retiring. Jill's retirement party and succession planning kickoff meeting. That's not the time. So we need to be looking at where we're going to be 5 years, 10 years in the future, who's going to be retiring. And many, many utilities are now on this track, but some of the smaller utilities are still having to struggle because they haven't got people. They don't have all the departments that some of the larger utilities do. So how do you carve out time in your day to be thinking about this? So often I find in utilities, everybody is so busy. And it's something that succession planning is done off the side of the desk, whereas it has to be brought into the mainstream and planned. So when we look at succession planning, there's 3 areas I was looking at here. Our present workforce composition. And as Beth talked about, where are those gaps? Who is going to retire in the next 5 to 10 years? What other factors may come into it? With succession planning now, what we're finding in some of the utilities that I work with is that, again, COVID has had a big impact here. I live in Vancouver. Vancouver is probably the most expensive place to live in the country. Housing is not affordable. So many people have now, while they've been working out of home, have either quit in Vancouver or the surrounds and moved to other areas, which is a lot cheaper. And they don't have to perhaps commute as long to work. They're looking at their life balance more than they used to. So these are things that are going to affect us in our succession planning. How are we going to retain those employees or be able to fill the positions that they are leaving? So taking a look, first off, at internal potential. And that's what I was talking about a little bit earlier. Who are the people who may be able to bring really good ideas and be able to move up the organization? And perhaps they're not the ones that we always think about. The second thing is, again, capturing that institutional knowledge. So having a formalized process for employee knowledge documentation. So this goes beyond just the regular standard operating procedures, but what is it that you know how to do as a manager for 30 years that you've got in your head that isn't documented? So doing interviews with those people, finding out about their job, finding out the things that they're doing that perhaps, when we're, in our offices, we don't know some of the things that they know. We need to, again, identify skills needed now and in the next 10 years, as I've talked about. And then development, technology, impacts, and training of where we're going to be going. I mean, it used to be we did everything manually, and now I remember bringing a group from South Africa to tour in British Columbia. And we went to the big membrane filtration plant in Vancouver. And they said to me, "Where's all the people? Is it a holiday today?" And I said, "No, there's not many people working in this plant. It's they're working in the field." So it's changed, as you know, dramatically. So how does that training and development work within this? So especially with the internal potential, this is where we can really develop our own people to bridge these gaps now and 10 years into the future. And one of the things that we need to look at more closely is mentoring. And either formally or informally, do these people who you are trying to bring along, do they have mentors? And so that we can build this team together for the future. So in the guidance document, and all of this information I'm taking is from the guidance document, we list a number of best practices. So first off is, as I say, implementing that supportive internal development. And one of the things, you'll see a word here that talks about the internal development culture and identifying a leader champion process. So it is very important when you're looking at the succession planning, is looking at how people fit in with the culture that you have. I know as a manager, when I was hiring people, I always used to send them out with some of my employees and just for the day, because they'd come back with really good insights as to how this person would fit in with the team. And I think that that is something, because one bad egg can really demoralize a whole team. So if we try on the recruitment and the raising people up in the organization, identify people who can lead those teams within the culture that we're trying to develop. We want a list and a process for identifying those high potential candidates for all leadership positions. Develop the internal program, focus on equality and diversity. And a colleague of mine, Kalpna Solanki, who's on the call I know today and was also on the guidance document development, she talked about not talking so much about diversity, but about equality. And she said diversity is making sure that you have gender balance, equity or balance in minorities, etc. But she said equality is where you go in as a woman and the only size of boots is somebody for a size 10, 12 man. So that was, I thought, a good analogy. So we talked about identifying and mentoring, having mentors to support this leadership development. I know in my own career, and I'm sure most of the people who are in management positions today always had a mentor that they could turn to and could support them as they rose through the organization. Using the gap analysis we've talked about, and then plan and schedule annual training. The training plan should be part of the annual evaluation. I know a lot of managers don't like the performance measurements that they have to do annually. They look at it and it's something that, oh God, I've got to do this, I'll do it. And it's something that's done again as quickly as possible. But one has to realize that from when I've worked with employees, they want the performance measurement because they truly believe that they're doing a good job and they want that recognized. And if you tell them what they're doing well, and then here are some things that we need to develop you on, it's going to be much more buy into that situation. So in the performance management system that we have, it should include that plan and the schedule for annual training. Where do you want to go with this organization? How can we get you there? And then the plan for experiential skills development. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about just the type of the EUM system for this. And employee development plans, it's in our guidance document, says should be completed for all succession plan candidates. I go beyond that. I think every employee in the organization should have an employee development plan of some type. Complete the annual review of high potential leadership candidates with current leaders and candidates. So getting together, how is this person progressing? Are they doing well? Where are they lacking in those gaps that they have that we need to fill? So talking to the present managers and bringing this as a team approach to identify who are the people who are going to be internally promotable as we move forward. And then establishing the expectation of the current leadership to ensure the succession plans are developed for every one of their direct reports. For managers, this should be something that is on your performance measurement and evaluation. Oh, sorry. Here we go. So when we're talking employee development, we talk about the process by which employees get the professional training needed to improve their skills and advance their knowledge. And this is something critical if you are going to have a good succession plan and if you're going to have the leadership. We all know that there is a tsunami of people retiring. We know that we're not the sexiest industry in the world. People are, going to IT and different areas. Very few people I know in high school said, I really want to go and work in the sewage plant. So how do we develop these people? How do we get the training that we need, and a development process to ensure the right people are receiving the right training and support? Right. So if we develop these people well, we are going to be able to identify the gaps. We're going to be identify, yes, perhaps this wasn't the right person that we thought they were going to be. But one of the things I want to stress here is that employee development is not a one-time task. It is ongoing. The performance measurement should not just be an annual performance measurement that you do with the employee and then it's put away. It needs to be done on an ongoing basis, and managers need to be held responsible and accountable for doing this. So an employee development plans should be done at all levels of the organization. And so you have a plan as to, with the operators, technicians, foremen, supervised managers, and the senior management team. So every one of those groups needs to have different development plans to take the organization where they're going to be. And we also have to recognize not everybody wants to progress within the organization. They don't want to be managers. So how do we keep those people engaged so that they are contributing? And training comes a long way of that. Very often people can see training as a reward. I know in some of the organizations we've done training with, people are coming and asking for the training. So it shouldn't be that they're asking, it should be part of the organizational culture that is there, that we do recognize that not everybody's going to go up the ladder, but how can they continue to contribute over a 20 or 30 year period and not get burnt out or jaded. So the development plans, we need to look at the competencies for progression, and they need to be ascertained, but these can change. So there are late bloomers. So somebody who comes in and perhaps does not fit the criteria of a leader or somebody who's going to progress at the beginning can develop over time as they become more confident. Very often people coming into the industry maybe not have a lot of competence. They don't have a lot of education, perhaps. How do we develop those as they go along and recognize that what they were 5 years ago may not be the person they are now? And Beth is we're going to be in the next session, look at the development of the training plans that will support that. So I'm going to talk now about effective utility management. And effective utility management is a way to train these people who are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. So this was developed by American Waterworks Association. It was developed by WEF, the Public Works Association, American EPA, and many other organizations that got together and said, okay, the skills that we need to run a utility are not just the technical skills. So they did a big study and ended up with an effective utility management primer that identified 10 attributes. Because one of the things when I came into the industry that I looked at, having come from teaching in the business school at UBC and working in many organizations in their management, is how little management training was done in the water industry. And with our operators, they are certified. with what was ABC, now the Water Professionals International. They have to get their certification levels to work in the plant. Our lab technicians have very strict standards that they perform by. So all of the people get sort of ongoing training, but there wasn't a specific training competencies for managers. And this was a big lack, I think, in the industry. So this is what ABC and WEF addressed. And they came up with this effective utility management that talked about and identified 10 attributes. Basically, what it was said is you have to have the technical skills. That's a no-brainer. But in engineering school, in the operator certification program, we're talking about how to run the utilities on a technical basis, our sampling, our chlorination, our distribution, breaks and repairs, all of those things. But to run a successful utility, you have to be able to run the business side of it as well. So they identified 10 attributes. And then what they did is they identified a number of competencies to go with those attributes. So just going through the attributes, I'm not going to go through them. They are all in your management checklists, but product quality obviously is a key one. But they looked at customer satisfaction, employee leadership and development, which is what we've been talking about a lot this morning. So what are the ways that you're going to do that? They looked at community sustainability. So look at the competency here. Actively leads in promoting an organization improvements to the community and water shelf health with external community partners, etc. So has this been something that's been on your radar as a manager? So these are things that they're coming out with. Financial viability. And it's interesting, my son is changing careers and he thinks that water and wastewater is good for society. So he's saying, well, I might want to go into that. And I was talking to about last night about effective utility management. And he said, well, what does that mean? And she said, it just means you run it well. And I said, yeah, well, it's a little bit more than that. And he said, well, what's in it? And I said, well, financial viability. He said, well, you've got to have enough money to run it, right? And I said, yeah, it takes a little bit more than that. But we went through each of the 10 attributes, and he was actually pretty smart. He came up with the overall concept, but not understanding that within that concept, as a manager, you don't have to just know that you need this. You need to know all the tools and skills to get it, to put it together. Infrastructure strategy and performance, operational optimization, enterprise resilience. So that's our risk management plans. Stakeholder understanding and support. And it's interesting because when I'm teaching in the effective utility management program, I often ask, what's the most important attribute? And some people say financial ability, some people say product quality, and there really isn't a right answer to this. But if I was to talk about one, I would always talk about stakeholder understanding and support, because unless you have that, unless your council will give you the money and understand where you're going and what your needs are, you don't necessarily get the budgets approved that you need. And if you don't have the budgets, you don't get the product quality perhaps. So this is a really critical one that we spend a lot of time looking at in the effective utility management program. And then water resource sustainability. So with the effective utility management, there is the effective utility management program that is a certificate program that covers all of the effective utility management attributes and competencies. Companies like Aqua have gone through. And one of the things that's really great about it is at the end of the certificate program, people have a piece of paper that certifies them as being an effective utility manager. And again, our operators get the certification, they get the paper, but what do we have as managers to say we are able to manage this utility? So in the employee development, in looking at where do we need to go, the effective utility management is now used throughout the world. There is an annual conference put on by WEF and AWWA. One year WEF does it, one year AWWA does it, and they put on a conference all around effective utility management. The sad part is that most utilities don't even know about it. So through the guidance documents, this will give you an opening into that. And just a final slide is that effective utility management has the 10 attributes, but it also looks at around the outer circle: continual improvement management, leadership, strategic business planning, knowledge management, and measurement. And with that, I'll thank you and turn it back over to Greg.
Thank you very much, Valerie. I think Valerie's given us some things to think about in this section around succession planning, and some of the points she made about how important it is to understand the composition of your organization right now and where people are in terms of retirement or moving on, and the importance of this institutional knowledge as really important. And the other concept that she talked about that I think is important is to understand the culture, and how is the culture of employee development, and how do you go about doing that? And then the last thing that she talked about, and as she moved on to the checklist that we have in our document, is because of Valerie's experience in working with the effective utilities management training program, we were able to borrow the elements of that program and include it in our documentation here. And so it really says that these are key elements for utility leaders, whether you're a supervisor or a manager, and maybe your utility can't necessarily afford to take the detailed training, but at least you have our checklist now that you can begin to look at. And at some point in time, maybe you do have the opportunity to take the more formalized effective utilities management detailed training. So thank you very much, Valerie. So we'd now like to move on to our third speaker. And the speaker is Beth Weir. And Beth is going to be speaking on training plans, and specifically on training plans with around technology. And she's going to talk about our operator checklists. Now, Beth is the senior water professional, probably the most hands-on of everybody on the list today with the region of York. And she has over 27 years of experience. She holds Class 4 tickets with water treatment, water distribution, and wastewater. And Beth is currently the chair of the CWWA Wastewater and Stormwater Committee, and she represents the CWWA on the Plumbing and Mechanical Advisory Council through the Canadian Institute of Plumbing and Heating. She also works with the Standards Council of Canada for drinking water and water reuse. I'd like to welcome Beth. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, good morning, colleagues from across Canada. I'm glad that you were able to join us. I'm here today to share the highlights on the training plans, training for new technologies, and operator checklists. I would also like to acknowledge William Fernandez, who helped with this document on the guidance part, as well as Mike Darbyshire. As industry evolves, both from a skill set perspective and a diverse workforce, we have to be agile. The key is to develop a training plan that addresses the right skill set required for the right position and at the right frequency. Human resources are our #1 asset. Without skilled workers, nothing else truly matters. Our systems today are more sophisticated and complex. This leads to the need for highly specialized skills and advanced training requirements for water and wastewater operators, maintenance staff, and process engineers, to name a few. It is critical to provide all staff the right training at the right frequency by the right knowledgeable individual, with follow-up to ensure the knowledge was understood and can be applied over time. The demographics of the incoming workers has changed dramatically to introduce diverse cultures. Utilities must not only have a long-term workforce plan, but one that appreciates diversity and inclusivity. The water sector in Canada has been experiencing a significant turnover in staffing, which will continue to increase over the next decade as many senior employees enter retirement. This loss of skilled workers can have operational and financial implications, particularly if it creates large voids in operational capacity, such as the ability to meet compliance, overtime costs, and delays in major projects. The success of these programs is driven by cross-departmental coordination, most notably between the utility, their HR department, and the union. Budget implications to implement staffing and training plans are optimized when planned and implemented over time. Walking through the best practices. The first step is to identify all of your positions that require the training. Remember to consider all aspects from corporate training to health and safety. Training plans should encompass regulatory requirements such as lockout, tagout, and position-specific requirements such as environmental management program training. Take a step back and ask yourselves, what should this position know? And how do I ensure that they have the right training to be successful? Next is to pinpoint all courses required, ensuring you are looking at the full spectrum of skill sets needed. Do a gap analysis and involve those who will be taking the courses. They know best what they need, so why not ask them? Then determine the frequencies. Is it required by regulations or required by your organization? When determining the frequencies, ensure all factors are considered. If a more stringent frequency is decided, it may be harder to adjust to the minimum, as precedents may have been set, leaving your corporation at potential risk. How are you going to execute the training? Are the courses to be delivered internally or by a third party? If the experience is held internally, ensure they receive trainer training. Be cognizant that staff may be training their peers, so they have to acquire relevant skills with support from their management. If a third-party contractor is required, consult your purchasing bylaw and adhere to those requirements. All trainers need to possess the ability to train, encompassing diversity and inclusivity. When I was listening to Valerie's presentation, it also made me think about the COVID part of it. Training plans couldn't stop even when COVID happened. We had to adjust our plans. We had to adjust how we did the delivery of training. Some of that was done online, which gave us a little bit more flexibility on how many people could attend, how they attended, or when they attended. Other parts had to be in person, and therefore COVID protocols had to be in place. But we had to adjust how we did it, not the plan itself. Lastly, you need to dedicate staff to monitoring training plan compliance. In some provinces and territories, this leads to documentation required for the certification or license renewals. Key performance indicators should also be developed to ensure your corporation is on target. Training plans should be implemented after the recruitment process. It is important to align your programs with years of service and positions of the staff team members. Training plans are developed to ensure compliance with regulation and job requirements. New team members will require some training that is only required once, whereas senior team members will require training at different frequencies. The training coordinators, trainers, and attendees are all required to execute a training plan. The key is to have a plan that's relevant, manageable, and directly related to the positions. As regulations become more stringent, the water and wastewater industry has been faced with implementing more complex technologies. Not only does this complicate the design and construction of processes and facilities, but it also complicates operations and maintenance. The advancement of such technologies can potentially lead to a skill deficit and/or an advancement of required certification levels. At pre-design, when the technology is identified and confirmed, the organization needs to provide the responsible individuals the required specific training at appropriate frequencies, considering initial and refresher training. This training needs could be included in the tender package and/or embedded into training plans with a review on knowledge transfer. The benefit is new technology can lead to better stewardship of the environment by producing better water quality and/or wastewater effluent. Advancing all staff's knowledge and skill set on advancing technologies leads to more informed and well-rounded operators, millwrights, and engineers. All organizations should be considering the system perspective to ensure that one solution doesn't create another concern, such as higher greenhouse gases. First, you need to identify what new technologies require this specific training. Is this technology unique? Is there different terminology, such as flow versus permeability? Next, who needs to understand how the system operates? How is it maintained? Is there specific control logic? If so, can you access the program to make changes or not? How do you troubleshoot, and who needs to be involved? Like the general training plan, you need to determine if the training is to be delivered internally or by a third party. If experience is being held, if expertise is held internally, ensure they receive the trainer training. Again, being cognizant that staff may be training their peers, therefore requiring relevant skills with support from their management. If third-party contractors are required, consult your purchasing bylaw and adhere to all of the requirements. All trainers need to possess the ability to train encompassing diversity and inclusion. Training should encompass all regulatory and system impacts, as well as functionality, operation, and required maintenance. Then, how often does the training need to occur? Is it determined through regulation or required by your organization? Is it annual or is a refresher required? Then don't forget to incorporate this training into your training plan as well. Lastly, best practice is to have a resource dedicated to monitoring all training compliance. In some provinces and territories, this leads to the documentation required for certification and license renewals and advancements. And key performance indicators should also be developed to ensure your corporation is on target. Training for new technology is best implemented before commissioning. Depending on the complexity, more direct specific training may be required. It is important to align this more specific training with initial commissioning, as well as capturing new staff as they come on board. Staff may also benefit from refresher training depending on the technology. Training coordinators, trainers, manufacturers, and attendees are all required to execute training for new technology. The key is to have the training relevant, manageable, and directly related to the position. I'm not going to go through the checklist in detail, but to help assist, we've incorporated these checklists within the guidance documents. It's intended to act as a guide from onboarding to ensuring staff understand the system as a whole, and all of the interdependencies. In wrapping up, I want to thank all of you for attending this webinar, and I hope you find the guidance manual helpful.
Thank you very much, Beth. We really appreciate your efforts on this area. A couple just general comments. I think you can see, as I said, Beth's a very hands-on person, and she's given us some very practical things with her and her committee members that put this information together. The checks, whether it be on training in general with positions, courses, frequency, execution, and monitoring. I liked your point that you made around having to adjust. You have the plan, you know what you're going to do, but things happen, whether it be COVID or some other things that come along. And sometimes that's our reality, is we have to adjust, we have to change it a little bit so that we can get the training done, but we still need to get it done. And the new technology is something we're all faced with, of having to implement this newer way of doing things as technology causes us to change and get all of our resources, our operators, our maintenance, our engineering folks up to speed. So thank you very much, Beth. We really appreciate your presentation. So I'll just continue along a little bit and make a few comments, and then I'm going to ask my colleagues to join me again. And I want to point out that this is only a brief glimpse of what's in the document that's been released today. In the chat, there's a link there. The full document has been distributed there today, and there will be over the next few days links where you can actually click on the downloadable checklists. This, I think you can appreciate, is fairly comprehensive work, and so there's some things that are not included in the presentation today. The first one is under recruiting. We have a whole section on recruiting, and we believe that that's big enough that it's its own topic. So CWWA is planning on having a separate topic on recruiting with the major conference coming up this fall in Halifax. And so I'd encourage you when you sign up for the conference in Halifax that you pay attention and join us for a continuation talking more detail on recruiting. The other thing we didn't cover today, there's a detailed maintenance checklist there. Take a good look at that and a list of other resources. So at this point in time, I would like to encourage questions from the audience. But I am going to ask the panel members to all put their camera on and their mic on, off, and we're going to join and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the topics we talked about today. And I'd encourage you to just either join in with comments or if you have questions. So we're just going to kind of walk through some of the topics we had here. And I'm going to throw out some questions or comments, and if that twigs any questions in your own mind, or if you have something in your own utility where you say, gee, we did some things here, this would be good to share with the group, just make a comment in the chat, and I may ask you to put your camera on and your mic on and join us a little bit. So we have about 10, 15 minutes here to have a bit of discussion. So I'd like to start off a little bit with talking about strategies that might be different as a result of the concept is diversity, inclusion, and equity. Now I noticed that Kalpna, who's our resident expert on this, has got a nice picture in the chat to make sure that we're clear that it's equity that people are talking about. And that doesn't mean we're all equal. It means we are all in a position to do the same thing. So her little schematic, I just draw your attention to that. But the questions that I have or for Beth or Nancy or Valerie, or I may even join in, is as we look at that differing workforce, as we look at the retirements that are happening, and there's just a different dynamic or a demographic out there. What have you seen so far? What are people doing to try to connect with the different demographic and workforce? And just open it to anybody. Or I'll pick somebody. Beth, you get a chance to go. Have you guys been doing anything unique? And then maybe everybody can chat a little bit. Have you guys been doing anything unique with the different demographic to try to connect with them?
Not sure that we've been doing maybe anything really unique, but we still hire based on job requirements and qualifications. It's really just trying to focus on that and not the other parts that people can have biases on. We have a lot of policies and guidelines through our HR that talks about the inclusive and barrier-free recruitment selection process. We apply accommodations wherever required. If somebody requires more time to write a test, we abide by that. Or if they need to have different mechanisms in place or different location to write or do whatever, we do apply the accommodations as they need. One thing we have done, and we've been doing it actually for many, many years, is if there's a written test as a component for the hiring process, we don't know who's written the test. So we do it as an anonymous. They come up as numbers. So as we are marking our the test component, we have no clue who it is. So that it's a very much, how did you answer it? And what's the score that's applied to it? We're also currently embedding some of the language of diversity and inclusion and equity into our collective agreement. Actually, currently right now, we're still in bargaining, so I can't say much about that, but we are embedding that language as well.
Good. Thanks, Beth. Nancy, any comments? And then I'm going to go to Valerie and see if she has any comments on this topic. Nancy?
Thanks, Greg, and thanks, Beth. Those were great comments. I think in addition to what Beth in York is doing, is the region has been promoting more education about diversity, and there was a significant training program on Indigenous history with the senior management team over the past year and a half. And even within our kind of our portal, our community communication, there's almost every day a conversation of what's happening in more community-based or at recognizing the diversity, so different celebrations. Very recently, I think it was International Women's Day, so there was a recognition on that. So I think almost every day there's some information about a different way of celebrating, recognizing, acknowledging, and I think that greater awareness is working towards being more inclusive as well.
Great, thanks, Nancy. Valerie, any comments on this area?
I'd like to pick up on what Beth said. I really like her idea about the anonymity on the tests and some of it, looking at people. Because I just emceed the Women in Public Works for International Women's Day. And none of the speakers, none, were in favor of affirmative action programs. They all said, we want to hire the best person for the job, no matter who. And there is a real pushback against intersectionality. And if you're not familiar with that, I wasn't. It was my son who alerted to me this. And this is where you sort of almost get points for your minority status. So if you're, or your gender, for ethnicity. And young or white males are now seeing themselves pushed out of promotions because they feel I could have had this job, but they needed a woman or they needed a minority. And intersectionality is becoming the pendulum swinging perhaps not into the center, but to the other way. So I really like what Beth was saying about what they're doing there. And I think it's something that as managers, we need to be careful that there is the equity, there's the equality, but that isn't that we're not hiring the best person for the job, because I don't think that does women or minorities a favor if they're thought to be hired just because of their background.
Good, thank you. So I noticed also when we're in the same area of hiring, we talked about that we have a section on recruiting in here, but we didn't cover it today. We're going to cover it later. But I noticed there is some recruiting. Kalpna, who's our one of our committee members, has posted some videos here on recruiting. And I know maybe William, you could also post, or if Toronto Water also has one. So there's two different sets of videos to help people better understand what's available for careers. And these are extremely well done videos. So I would just encourage people to take a look at Kelpna's link is posted. And as I said, William, maybe you could post the Toronto Water one. Just wonderful ways to approach getting the word out that there's a good career there in water. I'm going to flip to some different stuff a little bit, a couple of different things in the remaining time we have. And Beth, I want to dig a little bit deeper on the new technology since it's out there. I know you talked overview. I assume in the last while you've been involved in some new technology upgrades. Any learnings that come to mind very specifically on new technology where, well, for sure, I would want to do these two things for sure. I'll throw it back at you, and then I may ask Nancy the same thing. And Valerie, if you have any comments on new technology.
Yeah, for sure. I think like we had membranes come into the water industry, not, well, it's many years ago, I guess now. So I was actually an operator at the time, a team lead, learning how to run a membrane plant when we had zero knowledge or understanding. I just got off of maternity and there was this plant and I had to operate it. So it was very interesting to go down the road of what was the right training for that. So the biggest thing is really getting the right training with the right position. So you need to identify what does an operator need to know, what does a electrician, need to know, what does the mechanic need to know, what does your SCADA people need to know. So you really do have to understand what they need to know and train them to it. There's a lot of terminology differences. So if it's membrane, you've got the flow versus permeability. So they don't talk in terms of flow, they talk in terms of permeability, which is basically how much flow comes through like a squared centimeter of the membranes. So you have to understand all the terminologies that go with it. They have integrity testing, things that aren't in our normal previous language when it came to water treatment. So you really need to understand, what does it mean, and what do I do about the information I've been given. The troubleshooting and understanding the system interdependencies, you really need to understand what affects what, especially when you get into these complex situations, and you almost call it like a black box of the whole controls of what's happening within the system, but you need to understand what affects what in order to be able to do anything. I always think in the back of my mind when I think about training, I think about training for the skill set needed to fix an issue that occurs at 2 a.m. in the morning when you have minimum staff available. So you don't have people to call on, you're it. So we have to make sure that you have enough bench strength that people can be able to fix it on their own, or at least get through to maybe a reasonable hour where you could call people in. But you have to understand that people need to be able to troubleshoot and fix on their own at all hours. And that's kind of the lens I always think of for any kind of training.
Great. Nancy, any comments on new technology in your area?
Yeah, well, two thoughts there. We're doing a major SCADA supervisory control and data acquisition, if you don't know the acronym, update. And we've actually set up some virtual stations. So staff can go in and operate a virtual treatment plant to test it out, test out the system, see how it works under the new platform, and experience how to control, how to respond. And so that's worked very well. When we're doing the actual construction in the capital project, we've involved our operating team, our maintenance teams within the project. So they're involved. They understand, as for this project, it's a multi-year project. So as specific facility work comes up, they're involved with the team discussions. They're part of that team, and involved with the work that's going on in the site. So it's not just after, it's the before, and they're part of the review of the documentation as well. And I think that those steps of early involvement really help with the information. And I'm gonna switch because technology could be at the wastewater treatment plant, but I think when you first asked the question about technology, I think the tools that we're using to manage have changed. So in the region, there's a platform that we're using for dashboards, and I don't know if you watch Hawaii Five-0, but my dream has always been to have that dashboard like Hawaii Five-0. He types in and the panel comes up and all of the information is there. And that is one midday my dream. And so with this kind of power platform that we're using, we actually have these panels that are now coming up, and with KPIs to provide us information about flows, about hydro use, about our capital spending and the implementation of our capital projects. And so that has really changed how we manage and how we're informed about work that's going on. And where it used to be done through Excel spreadsheets, manually, you would have to go talk to someone. Now it's up on a dashboard and a platform. And that's really improved how we can communicate and share information as well. We use it for water loss on a water supply system, so we can very quickly see unfortunately, when we have leakages in the system, and which is occurring right now, and when we need to go do work. So I think that's the other piece of technology that's I mean, COVID in a way has pushed us there, more so than maybe at a rate much faster than what we've seen before. So I think there's really some really interesting opportunities with technology, and I hope they continue. Thank you.
You're on mute, Greg.
Yeah, Valerie, so any insights from your involvement in training related to new technology?
I will defer to my colleagues on the technology, my background. What I will suggest is cross-training. We haven't talked about cross-training, and just echoing Beth's comment about bench strength. If you want to build your bench strength, especially in a large utility, very often in the smaller utilities, as you would know, Greg, you have to be cross-trained. You don't have that many staff, so they're doing things. But in the larger ones especially, you need to be cross-training so that people get more exposure. It also leads them to greater job satisfaction because they're learning, they're looking at new initiatives, they're learning new technologies. So they see that, you know, almost as a reward for the employment. So cross-train.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. I think we've come to the end here, and so I just want to make a few comments with everybody still on the screen here, and then we'll ask Robert to join us. So my comments would be, I would really like to thank the whole committee, our working group, which is a subset of the Utilities Leadership Committee, led by Carl Bodemy, and the subset included, and I'm just going to list the names here of the people, and I'm just going to, you know, Beth, Nancy, and Valerie are on screen, but not on screen was Clayton, William, Kelpna, and Mike, who is retired. And so all of those folks working with together, we've spent probably a year and a half you know, understanding, discerning, listening, trying to figure out what would be a good guidance document to help utilities across Canada. And I'm very proud of the work that the committee has done. And I'd like to thank each and every one of you for the work you've done and encourage the utility members across Canada to take advantage of this. Whether you're big, whether you're small, there's probably something there for every one of you. So thank you. And I will ask Robert to join us for closing.
Well, I want to say that I take offense with Valerie's comment that we're not the sex. Oh, my camera. Here we go. That we are the sexiest industry. And I just want to say that to everybody. I feel I'm leading a very sexy industry. So why do I have that? Yesterday was like 70s day at my kid's school, so it was happened to be right near the door. Wow, lots of new names on today. I go through the participants and I don't know a lot of those people. If you're listening, welcome. And I hope that you're finding value in your CWWA membership and that you're part of one of the utilities. And we're reaching out in this new area to a lot of new people. And I hope you can stay involved. And we hope to continue this conversation into the future. Though the document is going to be, it's available now up on our website. We want you to share it. We'll be promoting it. But if you find value, please share it. If you like this video, or I mean, if you like this presentation, we've recorded it and it will be available. Give us a little time, maybe tomorrow. We'll have it up, edited, and we encourage you that if you enjoyed it, and there's a lot of HR people watching today, share it with your colleagues within your organization or others. So appreciate that. We talked, we had great things contributed from Kalpna, and we talked about William with videos. Do you have more resources you'd like to share? Send them to me and we'll post those up there too. We'll just create a couple extra links if you want to show off what you're doing, or you have some examples that you'd like to share and you're willing to let us put up on our site. That's the whole purpose of what we do here at CWWA, is try to help each other and support each other and share what we're doing. And not everyone has to create a new wheel. I want to thank Greg and the panelists today, all the work you've done. all the contributors that Greg listed that worked on this. Madeline Butchler, Kara Parisian for getting this completed and beautiful. Thanks, everyone. I hope we'll see you at the Window on Ottawa virtual sessions in May and June, but I really want to see you live in Halifax in November. Thanks again. Have a great day and be sexy.